Most people go through life completely asleep. They move through their days on autopilot, reacting to everything around them without ever stopping to question what's really happening. But right now, in this very moment, something might be shifting inside you. There are 3 unmistakable signs that appear when consciousness begins to break through the fog of everyday existence. If you've been experiencing these, everything you thought you knew about yourself is about to change. You know that feeling when you suddenly realize you've been driving for 20 minutes and can't remember a single moment of the journey? That's how most people live their entire lives. They're passengers in their own existence, watching thoughts happen, watching emotions happen, watching their whole life unfold as if they're watching a movie they have no control over. But something different has been happening to you lately, hasn't it? You've started noticing things, small things at first. The way your mind creates stories about everything. The way you react to situations before you even realize what's happening. The way you've been playing the same mental loops over and over again for years, maybe decades. This isn't random. This is the beginning of something that very few people ever experience in their lifetime. This is the start of genuine awakening. And before you roll your eyes at that word, understand that awakening isn't some mystical state reserved for monks sitting in caves. It's simply the process of waking up from the dream of who you think you are. Today, we're going to explore 3 specific signs that indicate this shift is happening within you. These aren't vague spiritual concepts. These are concrete, observable experiences that mark the transition from living unconsciously to living with actual awareness. And if you recognize even one of these signs in yourself, it means you've already started a journey that most people never even know exists. The collapse of your constructed identity. The first sign is probably the most unsettling one. Your sense of who you are starts falling apart, not in a dramatic, catastrophic way, but in a quiet, persistent way that you can't ignore anymore. Think about all the labels you've attached to yourself over the years. Your job title, your political beliefs, your personality traits. That thing you always say about yourself at parties. I'm an introvert. I'm a creative person. I'm someone who doesn't trust easily. I'm the responsible one in my family. You've built an entire structure of identity based on these descriptions. You've told yourself the same story about who you are so many times that it feels absolutely real. It feels like the truth. It feels like you, but then something starts happening. You begin to notice that this identity you've been carrying around isn't as solid as you thought. You catch yourself acting completely different from how you always describe yourself. You watch yourself being outgoing in a situation where you swore you'd be anxious. You find yourself making a spontaneous decision when you always insisted you were someone who plans everything. These moments create cracks in the identity structure. And at first, these cracks are terrifying. Because if you're not the person you've always believed yourself to be, then who are you? This is where most people panic and rush to rebuild the identity even stronger than before. They double down on their labels. They cling to their self-descriptions with even more intensity. They need to know who they are. They need the security of a fixed, permanent self. But if you're experiencing this first sign of awakening, you're not running back to rebuild the structure. Instead, you're sitting in the discomfort of not knowing. You're allowing the cracks to widen. You're starting to suspect that maybe, just maybe, you're not a fixed thing at all. Here's what's actually happening in these moments. You're beginning to see the difference between what you actually are and what you've been telling yourself you are. You're catching glimpses of something beneath all the labels and stories, something that's been there all along, but got completely covered up by this constructed identity. And this realization changes everything. Because once you see that your identity is just a collection of thoughts and stories you've been believing, you can't unsee it. The spell breaks. The character you've been playing starts to feel like a costume you can take off. You start noticing how much energy you've been spending maintaining this identity, how exhausting it's been to constantly monitor yourself to make sure you're acting consistent with your self-image, how limiting it's been to only do things that fit with who you think you're supposed to be. People who haven't experienced this will tell you to just be yourself, but you're starting to realize that being yourself is the problem. The self they're talking about is just another construction, another mask, another role you learned to play so well that you forgot it was a role. This is why this first sign feels so destabilizing. Your entire reference point is dissolving. The ground beneath your feet is disappearing. And there's no guarantee that solid ground exists anywhere else. But here's the paradox. The more you allow this identity to fall apart, the more real you actually become. Not real in the sense of having a clear, defined self. Real in the sense of being genuinely present without pretending to be anything in particular. You stop needing to announce who you are. You stop needing to defend your personality. You stop needing to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are. Because you're beginning to realize that what you are is so much larger and more fluid than any identity could ever capture. This doesn't mean you lose the ability to function in the world. You can still use your name. You can still have preferences and skills and characteristics. But you hold all of it more lightly. You know it's not the fundamental truth of what you are. It's just the particular way consciousness is expressing itself through this specific human organism. And when you're not desperately clinging to a fixed identity, something amazing happens. You become more adaptable, more creative, more genuinely responsive to life, because you're not constantly filtering everything through the lens of "is this who I am?" You're just here, present, available, without the constant need to be somebody in particular. This is the first sign, the collapse of your constructed identity. If you're experiencing this, don't try to fix it. Don't rush to build a new identity. Don't panic because you can't explain yourself anymore. This uncertainty, this not knowing, is actually the doorway. It's the space where genuine awakening becomes possible. The recognition of the mechanical nature of thought. The second sign is equally powerful, but works in a completely different way. You start seeing your thoughts as objects rather than truths. You begin to recognize that thinking is something that happens, not something you're doing. Pay attention to your mind right now. Watch what's happening. There's a constant stream of mental activity moving through your awareness. Thoughts about what you're hearing, judgments about whether you agree or disagree, memories being triggered, plans forming about what you'll do later, commentary about your own mental state. This inner narration never stops. It's been running your entire life. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, there's this continuous flow of mental noise. And for most of your life, you've been completely identified with it. You believe that this voice is your head, is you. But something's been changing lately. You've started noticing gaps between yourself and your thoughts. You've caught yourself watching your mind create elaborate stories and recognized that you're somehow separate from those stories. You've observed your thoughts contradicting themselves and realized there's an awareness present that's noticing the contradiction. This is the second sign of awakening. The recognition that thoughts are just phenomena arising in consciousness. They're not commands. They're not truths. They're not even really yours in any meaningful sense. Here's what makes this so revolutionary. Once you see that thoughts are just thoughts, you stop being controlled by them. Not because you're suppressing them or fighting them, but because you recognize their actual nature. Think about how much of your life has been determined by believing every thought that crosses your mind. You had a thought that said, "I can't do this," and you didn't do it. You had a thought that said, "They don't like me," and you acted defensive. You had a thought that said, "I need this to be happy," and you spent years chasing it. But thoughts are just neurological events. They're patterns of electrical activity in your brain. They arise based on conditioning, memory, biochemistry, and pure randomness. They're not insights into ultimate truth. They're just the mind doing what minds do which is generate an endless stream of mental content. When you start seeing this clearly, the whole game changes. You still have thoughts. The mind doesn't shut off, but you're no longer at the mercy of every passing mental event. You notice a thought arise that says something harsh about yourself. Instead of immediately believing it and feeling bad, you just see it as a thought. Oh, there's that self-critical thought again. That's been showing up since I was 12. It's just a conditioned pattern. And in that seeing, the thought loses its power over you. You notice your mind catastrophizing about the future. Instead of spiraling into anxiety, you recognize it as the mind's habit of creating worst-case scenarios. That's interesting. My mind is doing its protection routine again. It thinks by imagining terrible outcomes, it can prevent them. And in that recognition, you don't have to follow the thought into full-blown panic. This isn't positive thinking. This isn't replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. This is something much more fundamental. This is seeing through the mechanism itself. Most people are trapped in a battle with their own thoughts. They're trying to think better thoughts. They're trying to control their mind. They're trying to stop certain thoughts from appearing. And this creates endless suffering because it's based on the assumption that thoughts are the problem. But thoughts aren't the problem. Believing thoughts is the problem. Taking them as reality is the problem. Acting as if the voice in your head knows what it's talking about is the problem. And here's something even more interesting. The more you recognize thoughts as just mechanical events, the more space opens up around them. They start arising less compulsively. The mind becomes quieter, not because you're forcing it to be quiet, but because you're not feeding the thoughts with your attention and belief. This is why meditation becomes so much easier once this recognition happens. You're not trying to stop thinking anymore. You're just sitting there watching thoughts do their thing. Some come, some go. Some are loud, some are quiet. But none of them are a problem because you're no longer identified with the thinking process. You also start noticing how much mental suffering is created purely through thought, not through your circumstances, but through what your mind says about your circumstances. Two people can be in the exact same situation and have completely different experiences, based solely on their mental commentary about what's happening. This doesn't mean that real pain doesn't exist. Physical pain exists. Loss exists. Difficulty exists. But watch closely and you'll see how much of your suffering is self-created through repetitive thinking about situations rather than the situations themselves. Someone says something mildly critical and your mind replays it 300 times over the next week, each time adding more interpretation, more story, more emotional charge. The actual event lasted 10 seconds. Your mental suffering about it lasted for days, and all of that additional suffering was created purely through thought. When you see this mechanism clearly, you naturally stop feeding it so much. You don't have to discipline yourself or practice positive thinking. You just lose interest in the repetitive mental loops because you recognize them as repetitive mental loops. This is the second sign. The recognition of the mechanical nature of thought. If you're experiencing this, you're waking up from the dream of being a mind. You're recognizing yourself as the awareness in which thoughts appear rather than the thoughts themselves. The dissolution of time as your primary reference point. The third sign is perhaps the most subtle but also the most profound. You start noticing that you spend almost no time actually being present. Your attention is constantly split between remembering the past and anticipating the future. And in this recognition, something extraordinary begins to happen. Watch your mind closely for just a few minutes. Notice where your attention goes. Are you fully present with what's happening right now? Or is your mind wandering into memory, replaying conversations that already happened, rehearsing scenarios that might happen later? Most people spend almost their entire lives anywhere except the present moment. They're analyzing what happened yesterday. They're worrying about what might happen tomorrow. They're fantasizing about a better future or ruminating about past mistakes. They're mentally commenting on the present moment rather than actually experiencing it. But something's been shifting in your experience lately. You've been catching yourself lost in time. You've been noticing how rarely you're actually here. And more importantly, you've been having spontaneous experiences where you drop into the present moment so completely that everything becomes vivid and real in a way it normally isn't. These moments might be brief. You're walking and suddenly you're actually walking, fully present with the sensation of movement, the feeling of air, the aliveness of your body. You're talking to someone and suddenly you're actually listening, completely absorbed in the interaction without your usual mental commentary running in the background. You're eating and suddenly you're tasting your food for the first time in months, really tasting it, without thinking about anything else. These moments reveal something crucial. The present moment is the only place where life actually happens. Everything else is mental activity about life, but not life itself. This is a hard thing to grasp, because we've been conditioned to believe that thinking about life is living life. We think that analyzing our experiences makes them more real. We think that planning the future is necessary for the future to work out. We think that reviewing the past helps us learn from. And yes, practical thinking has its place. But watch what happens when thinking becomes your default mode. You miss everything. You miss the sunset because you're thinking about work. You miss the conversation because you're planning what you'll say next. You miss your entire life because you're constantly somewhere else, mentally. The third sign of awakening is when you start recognizing this pattern and naturally spending more time in direct experience, rather than mental commentary about experience. You begin to notice how peaceful the present moment actually is. Not peaceful in the sense that everything is comfortable or pleasant, but peaceful in the sense that there's no mental struggle happening. The struggle only exists in thought. The past and future only exist in thought. Right now, in this moment, there's just what's actually happening. This doesn't mean you can't remember the past or plan for the future. Those abilities remain available, but you're no longer lost in them. You're no longer using time as your primary reference point for understanding reality. Most people structure their entire sense of self around time. They are their past. They are their future. Their identity is built from memories and projections. I'm the person who had this childhood. I'm the person who's working toward these goals. I'm the person who went through that trauma. I'm the person who will finally be happy when this happens. But when the present moment becomes your primary reality, all of that loosens. You still have access to memory and planning when needed, but you're not continuously living in a mental timeline. And something beautiful happens in this shift. Life becomes immediate again, direct, real. You rediscover the quality of experience that you had as a child before your mind got so crowded with thoughts about everything. You look at something ordinary like a tree or a cup of coffee, and it's actually interesting again. Not because you're thinking interesting thoughts about it, but because you're actually seeing it. You're present with the direct sensory experience of it, rather than with your mental labels and associations about it. Relationships transform when you become present. Instead of interacting with your concepts about people, you start interacting with actual people. You notice how much of your connection with others happens through a filter of past impressions and future expectations. But when you meet someone fresh in this moment, without dragging the whole history into it, the interaction becomes alive. This is why children are so captivating to be around. They're not carrying the weight of time. They're here. They're present. They're experiencing life directly without the constant mental narration. And as you awaken, you start recovering this quality, not by becoming childish, but by recognizing the mechanism that took you away from presence in the first place. You also begin to notice how much anxiety is created purely by mental time travel. Anxiety doesn't exist in the present moment. It exists in thoughts about the future. Right now, in this actual moment, are you in danger? Usually not. But your mind creates entire scenarios about potential future problems, and your body responds as if those imagined scenarios are happening right now. Similarly, you notice how much depression and regret comes from living in the past. The past isn't happening right now. It exists only as thought. But when you're constantly reviewing it, judging it, wishing it were different, you create ongoing suffering about something that no longer exists except as mental content. The present moment contains challenges. Yes, it contains discomfort sometimes. But it doesn't contain the psychological suffering that comes from resisting what is or wishing things were different. That suffering is always created through thought, through comparing this moment to some imagined alternative. When you drop into presence, there's just what's actually happening. And there's an immediate sense of okayness with that, even if what's happening isn't particularly pleasant, because you're not in conflict with reality anymore. You're not arguing with what is, you're just here with it. This third sign, the dissolution of time as your primary reference point, fundamentally changes how you relate to your life. You stop postponing your existence, waiting for the right conditions before you can really be present. You recognize that there is only now, and that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your presence in each moment. If you're experiencing this, you're discovering something that sounds simple but is actually revolutionary. You're realizing that you can't live in the past or future because you can't actually be there. You can only ever be here now. And the suffering you've been carrying comes largely from trying to be somewhere you can't be. Integration and understanding. Now, if you're experiencing any of these three signs, the collapse of your constructed identity, the recognition of the mechanical nature of thought, or the dissolution of time as your primary reference point, you might be wondering what to do with this awareness. The answer is both simple and challenging. Don't do anything. Don't try to make something happen based on what you've recognized. Don't turn awakening into another project for the mind to work on. This is the trap that catches most people who start waking up. They recognize these signs and immediately the mind says, great, now how do I make this happen more? How do I get more awakened? What's the next step? But awakening isn't something you achieve. It's not a destination you arrive at. It's a seeing through of illusions. And that seeing happens now, or it doesn't happen at all. The most important thing you can do is simply notice what you're noticing. If you catch yourself identified with a thought, just notice that. If you recognize that you've been lost in time, just notice that. If you feel your identity structure reforming, just notice that. The noticing itself is the awakening. You don't need to do anything about what you notice. The awareness is already free. It's already awake. It's already here. You're just recognizing what's already true. And yes, life continues. You still have responsibilities and relationships and challenges. But you meet all of it from a different place. Not from the constructed self trying to manage everything, but from awareness itself responding spontaneously to whatever arises. This doesn't make you special. It doesn't put you above anyone else. If anything, it makes you more ordinary, more human, more connected to the simple reality of being alive, because you're no longer carrying around the weight of being somebody in particular. The three signs we've explored today aren't the end of anything. They're the beginning of living with eyes open. They mark the transition from sleepwalking through life to actually being present for it. And if you've recognized even one of these signs in yourself, something fundamentally important is already happening. You can't force this process. You can't make yourself awaken faster, but you can stop resisting what's already naturally occurring. You can stop rebuilding the structures that are trying to fall away. You can allow the recognition to deepen without making it into another achievement for your identity to claim. This is life waking up to itself, through you, as you. And it doesn't need your help. It just needs your willingness to see what's actually here, rather than continuing to believe the stories about what should be here. Watch the next video to go deeper into this understanding.